Hi folks, welcome back. I'm Janae Cherie, and today I'll be sharing my experience with you about how my child sexual abuse came to light. If that is not something that is for you, completely understand. I have a separate series about my cancer treatments, and so if that's what you're here for, definitely check out those videos. With that in mind, let me jump into a little bit of backstory, super quick for those who have just joined. I was molested from the ages of 8 to 18 by my father. It ended up coming to light at 22. And within the next 4 years, he was prosecuted and he did get convicted and sentenced to 14 years in prison. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the abuse itself in this video, but really want to talk about how the abuse came to light. I have a separate video talking about why I never reported it and I never came forward. I really thought that it's interesting how it came to light, and I kind of laugh about it. Sometimes you just gotta laugh at some of the craziness or else you might just cry, but it's a really interesting chain of events. So let me go through it with you. Like I said, abused from 8 to 18. I moved out at 18, never thought I could really do anything about it, never reported it because I didn't think there was enough evidence, there was nothing we could do. Let's fast forward to 22 years old. So my father has bipolar disorder, and when I was 22 years old, he had what's called a manic episode. If you're not super familiar with bipolar disorder, a series of highs and lows, bipolar highs or mania, and then bipolar lows and depression. And so he went manic. We ended up trying to do this whole intervention. He ended up walking around with no clothes on. I was hoping we could get him picked up on a 5150 and taken to a mental hospital for treatment because he was refusing to take his medication. Called the police. Unfortunately, by the time the police got there, he had put his clothes back on. And my father, master manipulator that he is, even in his manic state, an extremely unstable state, he was able to convince them that he was fine. He was able to take care of himself. And so even though we were telling them the story and said he just was walking around without his pants on, he is not stable, he needs to go to the hospital, he's refusing to take his meds, they just weren't really seeing it. And the police officer asked, well, has he ever been violent when he's been manic? Has he ever hurt anyone? And my mother starts going on, oh no, he would never hurt anyone. He's never hurt anyone when he's manic. He would never hurt anybody ever. And I just had it. I was so frustrated and I was like, this is ridiculous. Beside the fact that my mother is dismissing years and years of abuse when he is, not necessarily when he was manic, but just when he's not manic as well, that I very sarcastically replied, yeah, he never hurt anybody unless you count, molesting me my whole life. And my mother turned to me and she was so angry. She goes, it was one time. I suppose I should have included some backstory. My father did confess when I was 13 to quote unquote touching me inappropriately. I learned many years later that he dramatically minimized what that meant, and he never actually confessed to fully molesting me. Interestingly enough, and I am very supportive of law enforcement in many ways, as they did eventually come through for me, but the police officer who overheard that statement turned and walked away. He didn't listen. But for the first time ever, my mother had said something that started a conversation, and I practically yelled at her and I was like, no, it was my whole life. What are you talking about? It was one time. And I truly do believe my mother knew that this was a recurring issue, and I think for her own protective measures, she's blocked it out. But for the first time ever at 22 years old, listened to me and said, what do you mean? Tell me what happened. And so in that moment, I went through with her and my two sisters there of the high level, the big significant incidents. In terms of abuse, my father molested me hundreds of times, but there's 5 or 6 big incidents that stood out that I was able to just kind of give her an idea of what had happened, and she believed me. That is a long story. She ends up deciding that she doesn't believe me anymore later once my father convinces her otherwise. But at the time, she believed me. And she's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. She was so upset. She was emotional. She cried. She was so upset. My sisters were just so upset. And they were very young at the time. I don't use their names on this channel because it's their decision if they want to ever talk about it. But at the time, they would have been 14 and 16 or so. They were just so upset by this discussion. So I left there that night, and I made my mother promise before I left that she would not let my father alone with my sisters, because I was so worried he was going to do the same thing to them as he had done to me. And that's how we left it, and we all went home. My mother, ironically, the one person who has stood by my father this entire time, has not supported any of us at all, is ironically the one that started this fascinating sequence of events. Again, police officer didn't listen. Law enforcement has not taken in this information to do anything with it. My father was not picked up on a 5150. They let him stay. Everyone went home. But ironically, my sisters were so upset about what had happened that my mother called the school counselor and said, "Hey, can you please talk to my daughters? They're really upset. They found out that their sister was molested during her childhood and that her father did it. And they're just really upset." The gist of my mother's message, from what I understand, is she wanted the counselor to talk to my sisters and make it all better. And this is a pattern that we'll talk through as I go through these videos. My mother's idea of fixing this was, let's have dinner at Chili's and let daddy apologize and it will all go away. Just completely missing the fact that he has been abusing me my entire childhood. She thinks a margarita and some cheese fries can fix this, but that's exactly what she did. She called the counselor. "Hey, can you fix this? My daughters are upset." Thankfully, the school counselor took it seriously and reported it to CPS. And I'm so grateful that she did. I think it was about 2 weeks later or so, my mother called me in hysterics asking if the police had called me. And I said, "Why? What are you talking about? Why are the police going to call me?" And she's just hysterical, saying, "Oh my gosh, I screwed up. I called the girls' counselor and I tried to get them to talk to the girls to fix this because they felt really bad that their dad molested you. And I wanted them to just talk to them and make them feel better. And instead she called and reported him to Child Protective Services." And I just laughed at her. I'm like, of course they reported it. They're mandated reporters. She goes, "But he didn't do it to them. He did it to you." I'm like, it doesn't matter. This is why I told you he was going to do it to the girls. That's why I begged you to keep them safe. And for the record, she didn't. Within a week after telling her all of this and begging her to keep him from the girls, at least keeping them from being alone with the girls, within a week, I found out that she was left the girls with him again while he was still in a manic state. And I was just so angry. Regardless, she calls me in hysterics. I had not heard from law enforcement at that point. So I said, "No, haven't heard from them." "Well, what are you going to tell them?" I said, I have no idea if they're even going to call me. We'll see what happens. I wasn't going to promise that I was going to lie, which I know is what she wanted. But I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to tell them. I have no idea what they're going to ask me, but we'll see if they even call. I did end up lying to her later because a couple weeks later, the police did call me. The detective, he contacted me and he asked if he could come talk to me about my family. And I was at work at the time and I said, "Well, I can't really leave. Can you come to my office?" "Yeah, we can come to your office." They came in, we sat in a room and I said, "What do you want to know?" And he goes, "Well, we got a report from Child Protective Services and it's come to our attention that your father may have molested you as a child." And I said, "Yep, that's true." And he goes, "Oh, well, can you tell me about it?" And so similarly as I did with my mom, I focused on, there was a lot of situations where he molested me, but here's the handful of really significant incidents of molestation that occurred, the ones that I can really clearly pinpoint as exact day, time, significance. The detective looked at me and he said, "Well, we'd like to prosecute your father." And I straight up looked at him and I said, How are we going to do that? Like, we have no evidence. It's he said versus she said. What are we going to do? And he's like, "Well, we'll think of something." He goes, "But I'd really like to do that. And I'd like to protect your sisters and everything else." I said, "Well, me too. Of course I want to protect them." I said, "But if I thought there was something we could have done, I would have come to you sooner, but I just don't know." He says, "Well, let's take this one step at a time. Let's figure this out." And he said, "First thing I want you to do is put together a detailed description of all the things that happened to you." And so I spent probably a good month putting together very detailed descriptions of what happened, what age I was, where was it, what was the setting, what was the scenario, all the things I remembered for each incident. And then I explained just the multitude of other less significant incidents that I couldn't necessarily pinpoint dates and times over the years. And I provided that to him. And then as I was thinking about that, I started going through some of my emails from my father. And my father had at certain points sent some very explicit emails talking about taking away my innocence and purity and da-da-da. And is that a slam dunk for a case? No, it's absolutely not. But I sent those to him. And then the detective sits me down and he goes, well, next thing I want to do is talk about next steps. And I said, well, do you have enough? I don't think there's enough. Like, there's a couple emails in my testimony. He goes, no, it's probably not enough. He goes, I want us to get a confession. What? He said, yeah, I want to get a confession. How the hell are we going to get a confession? He goes, well, we want to do what we can to get him on a phone call, and you would be at the police station and I would be here, and that's how we would do it. We'd try to get him to talk about it. So while all this is going on, I was actually getting ready to get married, and I had told my mother that I did not want my father to walk me down the aisle. I told her I wasn't even sure I wanted him there. I had made it very clear that he has molested me my whole life. And keep in mind, at this time, my mother fully believed me, and she just kept saying, we need to go out to dinner and fix this. And I was like, this is not going to get fixed over dinner, but like, it's just not. And I was like, I'm not comfortable talking about this. Like, this is really stressing me out. I said, I need to plan my wedding. That's all I need to focus on right now. But my wedding actually turned out to be the perfect thing that was needed because, again, my mother and father really like to have this illusion that we are the perfect white picket fence family, that he's the amazing dad who is always there. And my mother was horrified that I wasn't going to let him walk me down the aisle. And so she's begging him to make amends with me. She's begging me to go out to dinner so he can apologize and we can fix this. I'm talking to the detective and I was terrified. The idea of doing the recorded confession and trying to talk to him about all these horrible things he did to me over the years was just terrifying. Anyway, I ended up having a conversation with somebody who really inspired me, and I called the detective and I said, I'm ready. And the timing just worked out perfectly. It took me a month or two to get from the original proposal from the detective saying, I want to do a confession. And what I first told him was, let's do it after the wedding. I can't think about it right now. I'm wedding planning. It's very stressful. Can we do it after? And he's like, in your time. Well, whatever we need to do, we'll do it in your time. After the wedding, like, I didn't want my dad at the wedding. Why on earth would I wait? And again, this person who really inspired me, it was about a month and a half before my wedding when I called the detective and I said, I'm ready. And fortunately, in that time where I was mulling this over, and I was coming to terms with the idea, I had received some emails from my father saying, hey, let's talk about this. Your mother told me what you've accused me of, and I really want to clear the air. And I said, I'm just not ready to talk, and it feels really uncomfortable to talk in person. It's very emotional. And I said, maybe we can have a phone call one of these days and just talk through it, and I just need to be ready. I couldn't have planned. It was like its own little movie. The timing was just, could not have been planned better. I called him right after his birthday and said, hey, is now a good time to talk? And keep in mind, I'm in the police station. The detective is with me. It's recording. And he says, yo, is this the talk you alluded to in your email? I'm like, if that's okay, I can call another time. We don't have to talk right now. If it's all right, I think I'm ready to talk now. And he goes, yeah, let's talk. And we got the confession. He admitted to almost everything. He, of course, tried to spin things. He tried to make it like I was younger than I said I was in certain stories, or he tried to minimize what he had done. But he essentially agreed that everything I accused him of he had done. He even brought up something I didn't remember, which is kind of terrifying. That makes me wonder how many other situations of abuse has he done that I don't remember, that I blocked out, or I was too young. But that's another conversation for another day. But we left there, and I have never seen a detective so happy in my life before or since. And he was like, we got him. That was the best confession I've ever gotten in my career. He goes, we've got him. He's admitted to it. We're going to get this. And he says, tomorrow I'm taking this to the district attorney. And if all goes well, he's going to be arrested tomorrow. And so the next day he was arrested. Long story short, that's how it came to light. My mother's pressure through this whole process and my mother's crazy way of thinking is how this all came to light. Her idea that it could be minimized and that the school counselor would fix it. And then her desire for a picture-perfect family walking me down the aisle put a lot of pressure on my father to fix it with me. I don't know if he would have had that conversation with me if I wasn't getting married. It worked out so well. Long story short, he was convicted. Yeah, that's my funny little story. I just think it's so funny that my mother, who is so vehemently opposed and says that we're all lying about everything and that he didn't do it, actually was a staunch believer at the beginning. She's the reason it was reported to the police in the first place, and that just cracks me up. So, the small joys you get out of a traumatic childhood in life. That was long. Thanks for sticking with me. I hope you found that amusing. I think everyone's journey is so fascinating. I've talked to so many people about their own journeys, and I really do hope that whatever your own journey is, that your abuser gets the justice that they deserve and that they go to jail for a very long time for hurting you. And I hope that you are getting the help you need to be healthy and happy and supported. Life is tough. I know there's many of us who've been abused who are going through a lot of things, and we deal with a lot of side effects and trauma. I hope you can find some funny stories amongst it all, even if it's how he or she was reported to the police in the first place. With that in mind, share your stories in the comments. Let me know what you want to know about. What are you going through? What would be helpful to you as you go through your own journey? Thanks again for joining. Please like and share, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks again. I'm Janae Cherie, and I am here to tell my stories.